I've got a little butterfly tutorial for you. I'm using a very neutral mixture. I'm using some cobalt blue with buff titanium and a touch of my yellow ochre. It just makes it nice and soft and gray. And I'm using a number 8 round by Silver Black Velvet, and I'm just painting a very pale first layer of my wing, and I'm being careful to leave a few areas of dry white paper that will act as a highlight. I'm going to pull that color down into the lower part of the wing, and while this entire wing is still slightly damp, this is when I can define some of those edges to make them a little bit more crisp. So I'm going to go back into my palette and add just a bit of slightly darker, it's more concentrated color into the outer edge of the wing tip there. And see where the paper is dry on the outside of the wing? That's where I can create that nice hard edge. I'm going to grab a bit more paint, a little bit darker now, and just drop in, just poke in some of that darker color into the bottom where it meets the body. Now I'm going to add a bit more cobalt blue where that wing meets the body of the butterfly, and I'll just touch it in to a few places in the outer edge as well. And because that wing is still slightly damp, the paint will softly fade into that wet area. But if it's starting to dry, you can take a thirsty brush and just soften it up a little bit. Another nice thing about watercolor is you can create these soft little veins within the butterfly wing using that cobalt blue. And because I'm painting onto that damp paper, it's going to create just a very soft, faint line. It won't have a hard edge. I'm curving, following the lines of the wing, and just defining the outer edge of that wing a little bit more. It'll just give it a little bit more of that crisp edge. There is a bit of Winsor Violet in my cobalt blue mixture, just to let you know. So now we will let that first layer completely dry, and we're going to go over it with another layer of watercolor paint. And it's important that it's dry because this way we can get some more defined lines within our wing. So I've got that same mixture of a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of my Winsor Violet, and a touch of buff titanium. And it's still a fairly light mix of paint. And I'm just creating some little lines that follow the shape of the wing. And you'll notice that I'm skipping over some areas, leaving a little bit of a gap. And that just creates a tiny bit of a highlight within that wing. Adding some deeper color in just some areas, especially down where the wing meets the body. That contrast of light watercolor and darker detail really makes it stand out. And as I paint in the body, I'm going to be using a fine liner or a rigger brush for the antenna. I'm using a size 0. They're very small, thin brushes, great for tiny lines like these antennae. You can use a round if you have a really small one. And then once this is dry, I'm going to paint in that second wing. There's just a tiny bit of it showing. You can see my pencil line just barely. You can use the same blue mixture. I'm using it mixed with a touch of green to go along with this painting, but I just painted in the outer edge, and then I'm using a thirsty brush to soften that area, that edge where it meets the other wing, and then adding in a bit of my cobalt blue and purple mixture into the outer edge and the inner part. If you'd like to learn how to paint a hydrangea similar to this one, I've got a beautiful heart-shaped hydrangea in my watercolor floral workshop. So check out my classes, it's available there.